Welcome everybody. We're going to talk about health. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thank you for joining us. I'm here with Drew and Elodie. We will do introductions into the nature of the work that we do through our conversation, I think. But we're going to talk effectively around health. How do we stay healthy? How do societies stay healthy? What does it mean about the future of how we can be healthy as whole systems? I am the founder of something called the Bio-Leadership Project, and we work with a frame that says the principles of a lot of the dominant ways of doing things in the world, whether it's business or government or indeed health, are based on principles that take away from life. But what do different forms of progress look like that give life back? And it's a real honor to be hosting this conversation with Elodie, who I think is right at the forefront of doing some amazing work to understand how does nature stay healthy itself. And Drew is doing some brilliant work in terms of regionally, how do we bring diversity and sustain biodiversity to sustain the health of all systems. Before we start, I thought it would be a really good thing to just bring nature into the room. And if you're with me, I'm going to invite a breath, just one breath. But in that breath for yourself, wouldn't it be lovely that we think about a place in nature that means something for us? It might be a garden, it might be a view out of the window, it might be a beautiful place in the wilderness. But I think if we're going to talk about health with nature, it's really important that we do a little bit with nature, right? So if you feel comfortable to close your eyes, you can close the eyes. And I invite you to take a breath in and think about that beautiful place that sustains your life and does good for you. And let's take that breath out. And we can thank all the rivers and the deserts and the trees and the mountains and so on. They sustain our life. Thank you. All right, let's make a start. So why don't we start with Drew? You've got a local perspective. You know what's going on with the ecosystems here in relationship to social systems in the UAE. What's on your mind at the moment in the context of how does society stay healthy?
Sure. Thanks, Anders. I think, we've just heard a very different approach to health, where wearing, sensors on your eye and so on. And what I would like you to just think a little bit about is, what really do we mean by health, though? Bearing in mind that we're living on a planet with 8.2 billion people, most of whom are never going to be able to afford to have sensors on their eyes or even really fairly basic medical treatment. So I think it really is useful to actually look back at what really we mean by health. And what I would like to really say is I think that human health and environmental health and nature are all absolutely intricately linked. Many of our health problems that we have today, including many of the increases in illnesses like cancer rates and diabetes and obesity and all of these kind of chronic things, really are in some ways a symptom of what we're doing in the environment. So I'm working with Emirates Nature WWF here in the UAE, and what we're looking at is to try to devise a system where the human communities can live more in harmony with nature and not destroy nature to maybe to such an effect, and look back at traditional communities in the UAE, traditional societies, the heritage societies, and see how they were able to live in harmony with nature in the past, and try to encourage some of those kind of systems, reintroduce them in a sense, whether it's helping farmers in the mountains grow more sustainable and healthy crops without so many chemicals, without using so much water, and so on, or actually introducing people who live in the cities, and the cities are, a stressful, high-tech, fast-moving environment, how we can reintroduce a bit of nature into their lives by connecting them with nature, whether it's in the urban environment or more importantly out actually in the desert, in the mountains and the mangroves and the ocean here in the UAE.
That's great. And Andrew, just whilst you're on that, I suppose to put a pin in something, urban living we now can show is increasing certain rates of unhealthy life. Could you say a little bit more about that, just to have a benchmark level of modern life, the way we're accelerating is actually deteriorating health? Can we say that for a fact?
It is, and I think we can see that just from, from chronic disease rates and so on. Part of the issue is that our modern, very consumer-driven, expansionist kind of life is basically causing all sorts of environmental issues, whether it's climate change, because we're putting out too much CO2 and burning fossil fuels too much, or microplastics, or carcinogens, radiation, whatever in the environment, breathing in car fumes, all of these kind of things, which are at the moment a part of urban living, but I don't think they have to be. There are ways that we can try to get away from this.
Great. Okay, and we'll touch, the conversation I think is going to flow into what is prevention versus treatment, how to think more systemically about things, but great to have that benchmark of if we keep going like this, we're increasing challenges around health, right? Elodie, your work, we've had amazing conversations about what it is that you do, and I guess you've got this lens of what's happening in nature so that nature understands health in itself. Would you say a little about where did that come from? Say a bit more about your work and what you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely, and I echo everything that Drew has said. He said it very articulately. So I work in a field called zoopharmacognosy, which is a long and complicated term that means the study of how animals use medicine in the wild. And this can take many different forms throughout the animal kingdom. My PhD work was on wild chimpanzees, but they're by no means the only animals that know how to tend to their own healthcare needs. There are great bustard birds, ants self-medicate, civets, geese, bears. There's examples from all over the animal kingdom, and we're learning more and more. Every month that goes by, there's a new exciting paper. So what we've learned, especially in the last few years where there's been a lot of new kind of science out on this, is that animals are actually really good at taking care of themselves. They're really good at surviving. And this shouldn't necessarily be a surprise to us. They're good at finding the food they need, they're good at finding the shelter they need. Why wouldn't they have evolved or learned behavioral strategies for finding the medicines that they need? And on that note, the world is full of these amazing natural medicinal compounds. So these compounds, they're called, in plants, for example, they're called plant secondary metabolites or plant secondary compounds. And they're chemicals that were actually generated by, for example, we're talking about plants now, by plants as a defense system for the plant. So when plants are under attack by pathogens or herbivores, plants will produce this compound to help heal the wounds that are inflicted on them or defend against whatever is trying to eat them. And what's amazing is that we humans and also animals throughout the animal kingdom possess receptors, possess pathways that actually recognize these plant secondary metabolites, which is so cool. And it also, if you think about what that means, it kind of is a nice way of grounding ourselves and reminding ourselves that we humans and also animals have co-evolved, we've coexisted with plants for as long as we've been around on this planet. The fact that our bodies recognize these chemicals show that we have a biochemical kinship with the plants on this planet, and also the fungi network, the fungal networks, the microorganisms. So it's something to just remind ourselves that we were once part, and we still could be part of this entangled web of medicinal relationships. We have just kind of gotten distracted along the way. And I think my work, I try to remind people that animals are still using these medicinal compounds, these natural produced medicines. The world is full of these, the world has granted us these gifts of these medicinal compounds, and instead of trying to figure out how to form reciprocal relationships with those compounds and harvest them sustainably and protect them and protect animals' access to them and our own access to them, we're destroying them. We're chopping down our forests, we're bleaching our corals, and in doing so, we're kind of, limiting our own medicinal futures. We're kind of blocking our own pathway toward a healthy future.
You take me to, you said something amazing actually about how you've seen in your work that trees that sustain some of these healthy qualities also have a harder quality from a construction perspective. And that cruel irony that, across the world we're recognizing plant species, tree species that are solid for our own construction needs when they also hold properties that could keep us healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of these ironic patterns that I'm finding in my research, I work across different ecosystems. I worked in Uganda, now I'm working in the central Peruvian Amazon, is that there is a really unfortunate overlap in that a lot of the medicinal trees, I look specifically at medicinal barks, that a lot of the barks that are targeted by animals, probably for healthcare needs, are also seeming to be the trees that are targeted for illegal logging. And one of the reasons behind this is that it's not necessarily a coincidence. It's because potentially what I'm thinking is that it's these same medicinal compounds that are bioactive for helping prevent or fight off disease, that's also keeping that timber product from getting infested by termites, from getting fungal growth. So it's this unfortunate. It's an unfortunate, not coincidence, but pattern that's popping up, and it's something that we have to bear in mind when development is moving forward and we're picking what materials we're going to use. We really have to be careful that, again, the forests that we're cutting down to build with are not the same forests that are providing life to our more than human neighbors and to ourselves.
It's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. This balance of what do we conserve out there to conserve ourselves. You also remind me of something which maybe moves us into this question of prevention versus treatment. There's that beautiful narrative about how in Chinese medicine, traditionally the doctor would be paid when you stayed healthy rather than for treating you when you became ill, And there's something about how do we protect, and I think in that tradition there's also something around you observe the health and the flow of a whole system. You observe the qualities that sustain life, not just focus on problems as they come up. Drew, earlier we were speaking about the notion of blue zones and sort of research or questions that you're holding. Maybe you could say a little bit about that, because it puts that emphasis on what are the conditions that keep us healthy.
Sure, and I think a lot of this is stuff that everybody already knows, and it's not really new. But if we go to talk about the blue zones is a concept that was brought in by Dan Buttner and his co-workers, where they looked at where in the world are there communities and people who have a higher level of health, higher longevity, lots of people in their 90s and 100s still reasonably healthy, lower levels of chronic disease, and looked at the factors in those societies that were maybe responsible. And they identified, I think it was 6 different places, like Okinawa in Japan and Sardinia and a place in Greece, and Costa Rica and so on, where you could find these and call them blue zones. I'm not quite sure why they're called blue zones, but anyway. They found that the features that linked all these areas were things that we know about, really. It's exercise, a good diet, which is basically a plant-based diet, low levels of alcohol consumption, not no alcohol consumption, just kind of in moderation, but particularly a strong community, which often with multi-generational families living together and supporting each other, a kind of a purpose to life, which we've often lost, I think, in modern urban living. So we know these kind of things. The public health people are always saying, exercise, better diet, things in moderation, and so on and so on. but it's how can we bring these into modern life, if you like, and I think that this has a lot of relationship with nature as well. So these blue zones, people tend to be living in kind of fairly close harmony with their environment as well as within the community. So, this is something that I think really we should be concentrating very much more on. It's this kind of prevention of disease, maintenance of health, rather than looking at ways to treat problems once they arise. If the problem doesn't arise in the first place, it's a much, much better approach. One of the issues, I think, is that medical research is really driven very much on a profit basis largely, and the kind of traditional medicines and potentially plant-based medicine and so on often are not something which is going to bring the drug companies a lot of money or the high-tech companies a lot of money. There's a real lack of research, I think, into looking at natural products and natural, more nature-based kind of solutions to life. And I think that's something which, I think we really need to change somehow.
It's very good, thank you. This is all taken in, maybe I'm just thinking we've got a couple more minutes of questions ourselves and we can open it up to the floor. I think we should be devil's advocate for ourselves almost, because I think probably the three of us share a perspective that the future really could be healthier if it's more about prevention and almost protecting nature, getting out of the way of trying to intervene and letting us all be just healthier in deeper ways. And I'm just curious, when you think about what actions are needed, a question for both of you, what do you see as like, we're at a conference which is about creating the future, so what does that look like in practice in the context of what we're talking about? Is it stop some stuff, or how do we build on what we're talking about here? Elodie, maybe. Yeah.
I can start. It's a great question. I think there's a couple of different ways to go about sort of thinking about what a healthier future would look like. For me, something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is how we can change our perspective from seeing animals, from seeing plants, as things that we can learn about, and instead refocus our mindset to thinking about them as entities and creatures that we can learn from. So animals, the natural world is a teacher rather than the subject for us to study and probe and conduct, invasive research into. I think the natural world has figured a lot out that we don't know. We have to humble ourselves to remember that we as a species don't actually know all that much about the natural world. There are a lot of animals that are more immersed than we are in it, that have a way better understanding, and that takes humility for us to admit to ourselves. And I think part of that is also then thinking reciprocally about our relationships to the natural world. How can we, if we're benefiting from, how can we give back? How can we make sure that things that benefit us as humans is also benefiting our more than human neighbors? So I think it's going to take a lot of, as we move forward, a lot of thinking ethically and thinking in a more than human way and through a more than human lens.
Great, thank you. Drew, maybe you could build on that.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I guess, I think also we can actually do practical things. And by this I mean, when we design cities with urban planning, for example, there's so much you can do, building in green spaces, building in cities that are more conducive to exercise, cycling, walking, and so on. And this is something that actually here in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi is really at the forefront of urban planning at the moment. And I think this is something, it's really, really good. It needs to be expanded on, because we can bring nature into the cities and we can take people out into nature as well. And I think both of these things really give a greater respect for nature, If we have a greater respect for nature, we will treat our environment better, and if we treat our environment better, then we treat our health better.
It's brilliant. Thank you both. Yeah, I've just caught some thoughts on just to maybe reflecting back on what you're saying, but there's this notion of the anthropocentric worldview. If you keep that in medicine, we're still taking from nature. It's the same pattern that's making so much of our systems unhealthy. Like I really hear in what you were saying, Elodie, how do we do health by, yes, doing things that are good for us, but seeing ourselves as part of living systems? There's something in that. There's a principle I wanted to share from our work with bioleadership, and lots of systems thinkers like draw a line under this, is a living system is unsustainable if it tries to purely maximize. So when any healthy system, any ecological system, if it operates through a principle of maximization, often that takes it out of balance and then the whole system crashes. And when you look at healthy living systems, they operate through principles of optimization. So they're still in competition. Nature is incredibly violently competitive. Things eat themselves. However, that form of healthy competition keeps the whole system healthy and balanced. And it strikes me that we're not quite there yet in our social human systems with optimizing and different forms of balance. So that came up to mind. And I guess there's also this piece around regeneration. You know, how can we do health? How can we bring all of the... Because there's an interesting dynamic for me of how can it be and how can it be prevention and new forms of innovation? But for every form of innovation, can it be done in new ways that are regenerative for our wider systems, so that they're good for nature as well as for ourselves? No. The other thought that came up is a brilliant colleague and friend of mine said to me recently, what happens if we take the 20, 30-year view on health systems? And certainly in the UK, which is where I'm based, it looks like those health systems they're already crumbling, you know. So what do we do about the fact that we're just not going to have enough doctors, nurses, resource to do the curative treatment level work? How do we resource the next generations of health workers to be ready for resilience, prevention, adaptability, and so on? And that means taking kids into nature now. You know, it means getting young people to understand the principles and health of... Oh, I hope that's... I don't know. I don't think that's my mic. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's... So think about education. Should we take some questions from the floor? We've got sort of 10 minutes or so. Curious where you're at. What have you heard? Any questions for our speakers? Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Right, yeah, any questions? And I hope we've got a roaming mic, or I can... There's one at the back. Do we have roaming mics, or should... But we're just taking some questions from the floor. I'll tell you what, I'll do it, and then you guys can answer. Yeah. There's one at the back, and I'll come back to you. Okay. Do you have a mic there? Yeah.
I'll take care of it. Okay, perfect. There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Hi. I really like the talk. It's really interesting. I think a lot about how, if we want to move towards that, we need to start at a place of actually caring. And I think, especially from, like on a human level, when we have such a deep disconnection from nature, where do we start on the fundamental to create that first? And what would your insights be around that? Thank you.
I can speak to that quickly. I think there's a mantra that I always say to myself when I'm in the forest, when I'm in the field, which is that if you see it, if you name it, you can see it. And if you see it, you can save it. And I think that's something that I experienced firsthand, arriving, for example, in a completely new ecosystem. I worked in Western Uganda for my PhD, so I was there in the field for quite a while with the chimps. And at first, I think I grew up in New York City. I grew up in a concrete jungle. I wasn't surrounded by nature. And I would walk down, I'd walk to school, I'd walk around the city, and there were trees planted on all sides of me, but I never paid attention to them. And then suddenly I plopped down in this incredible forest, and I'm surrounded by trees, and I'm expected to start identifying them. And telling them apart. And I really I didn't know how I was going to do it. And so I started beginning to really try to find ways to learn the trees by their bark, by their leaves, by their size, by their smell. The bark has all different tastes. You really get to I was treating each tree sort of as an individual, and that was helping kind of cement in my brain the differences between all of them, and then suddenly the world became so expansive. And the second you start seeing trees as individuals, animals as individuals, you start being able to see them everywhere. And then suddenly you're walking down the street in New York City and I'm seeing bugs and I'm saying hi to the sycamore trees, and there's you're suddenly surrounded by life. And then, and only then, can you go about saving those things and saving those wild places and saving the, medicinal cabinets, the medicine cabinets all around you, the forests, the corals, whatever it is. But you have to start with being able to kind of see and name nature. So I think that, and I think maybe Drew can speak to that as well with educational programs.
Yeah, I think so. And I think really we have to learn from children in a sense, because children relate to animals and to nature, I think, in a much more close way that we kind of lose as adults. If you go into a clothes store, for example, and you look at the children's clothes, almost every one of them has got animals covered in it, whether it's sharks for the boys or flamingos for girls' clothes or whatever. And kids with pet animals, they kind of think of them as, I wouldn't say as people, but as equals almost, in a sense that we as adults kind of lose. And I think it's really important to take children out actually into nature and introduce them to wild wilderness, to living, see the animals living in harmony, if you like, with nature. So at Emirates Nature, for example, we do take our volunteer program, volunteers out into the desert at night and show them the beetles and the scorpions and the geckos and the gerbils, maybe a fox if we're lucky, or a snake if we're lucky, and show that the desert is actually a really living environment. It's not just some empty space. And it's amazing just how people react when they actually realize this and see it and really get excited by it. And I think we need more and more of this. People actually need to experience nature in their lives much more to appreciate it. And if they can appreciate nature, then there's a chance we can actually conserve and save nature into the future.
That's great. Thank you. We had a question here. Oh, my mic's back up. Thanks. Thank you. Just here. I'll just say one quick thing just before you. I had the joy of we run deep nature immersions, and I've taken people to Iceland and Romania, and we've done it all around the world. More and more for me today, it's so important that we help people connect with the land where their food grows from. It's so magical, the soil beneath our feet, the fact that it creates the things that keep us alive. And I realized, for even doing this work, for a lot of my adult life, I was so far away from remembering it's actually really magical. It's like, wow, that has come out of nothing from a seed, and it's sustaining my life. And if we can tune into that, I think it's a very remarkable thing. And we're living in a world where, again, I'll speak for the UK with direct experience, people feel like they're really polarizing. We divide each other up. We as society need to heal, our systems need to heal, not just ourselves. Growing food together and recognizing that food has that same beautiful, miraculous seed of life in itself is a huge thing for me at the moment. Yeah. We had another question here, and I think we've got 5 more minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. It's very inspiring, and especially it resonates with me. I come from Hong Kong, and I've been already involved in the project that was called Adventure Therapy. It's exactly what we were introducing, more connection to the nature, starting with the children first. But I always thought, because you're very global, so I always thought how and what would be the strategy that we can bring it into masses, how people can understand the importance of that path and to stick to that. Because myself, I've been living without any traditional medicine, not traditional, I mean not conventional, I haven't taken for 20 years. And it's because of that awareness, but I'm just there maybe in this 10% of people like you. So that was always there in my mind. What would be the strategy to bring it further?
That's a really good question, and it's a very difficult one to answer, because there's almost a contradiction. If you take too many people out into nature, particularly in somewhere like here, which is a very fragile desert ecosystem, you're in danger of actually destroying the resource that you're trying to bring people into. So I think this is why we have to kind of also look at things like urban planning and bringing nature into the cities much more. And as a kind of conservationist, one of the things that we often kind of think of is like invasive exotic species are kind of bad. But most of the birds, for example, if you go outside in Dubai into the parks, and you can see bulbuls and myna birds and crows and stuff, almost all of those are not UAE native species. They're all exotic species. But in a sense, I don't think that actually matters when it comes to connecting with nature, because they are still part of nature. Yeah, they're not the native species here, but whether you hear a bird, most people aren't going to know what kind of bulbul it is. They just hear it. Oh, that's nice. There's a bird there, or a butterfly flying past. And these things are important, and we can bring them into the city much more. I think your idea of the magic of growing food is also really important, and kind of urban farms and urban gardens and community gardens are a real way to go as well.
And I can also speak to that. The thing that I'm very excited about is the rights of nature movement. So it's a legal and ideological movement that's sort of decentering the human and trying to give rights to nature and the natural environment. And we've seen some successes around the world. The movement is growing. And from a legal standpoint, it's incredibly exciting. We have, rights of nature, acknowledgements being written into constitutions, and all that's great. But for me, what's the most exciting is the shift in perspective that it's forcing people to consider. It's a very polarizing movement. People get very upset about it. But I think that's part of the fight, in a way, is getting people to think about, wait a minute, how come corporations have more rights than mountains and rivers and landscapes around us? So for me, it's about this term that I mentioned, the community of life, earlier. It's how do we bring ourselves back into, away from this kind of branch of exceptionalism and human-centric thinking, that we're the only creatures that live on this planet that deserve it all. We have objectified the natural world, and because we've objectified it, we can now exploit it and not feel bad about it. And what the Rights of Nature movement is trying to get us all to do is first start with the de-objectification, so that we can realize how messed up it's been, how we've been treating our planet and the more than human world.
Thank you for bringing that in. Oh, sorry, can I borrow your microphone? Thank you for bringing that in. It strikes me that in a world where we are placing so much energy on intelligence, there's something about wisdom. And when you look at the health of a natural system, and through some of the deep connection to nature work that I do, I realize a different quality of understanding about how things flow comes to us, and an understanding of interconnection and an understanding of patterns comes up. And a wish that I have is certainly that when we think about the future, we think about the wisdom that we might hold that's different to intelligence of certain kinds, and also acceleration of certain kinds. It's interesting when you really connect with nature and with seasons, you realize letting go is part of health. Composting is part of health sometimes. It's been a whistle-stop tour, already more than 35 minutes. So I'm just wondering, we're going to be around, I think, if anybody wants to sort of say hi. Is there anything that either of you would like to just offer as a, here's what's coming next in your work, or questions that you're holding, just so that we're all aware of how to stay connected?
And I just think that really we need to realize that planetary health, human health, environmental health are all really closely related. They're not different agendas. And when we see in nature a natural system working in harmony and realize that, you know, it's easy to knock things out of harmony. And I think that's, in a sense, is what we're doing with the world today. We actually really need to learn from nature, look at nature, and try to get back that kind of harmony, that holistic approach.
And similarly, I think what I'm doing, focusing on in the next sort of projects that I'm trying to plan is how we can be strategic about making sure that we as humans and also non-human animals are maintaining access to their medicinal resources that they need to stay alive. We can pour money and energy into preserving habitats, but if those habitats lack medicines that animals need, that's not really protecting them. So I'm working with some cool organizations like Fauna and Flora and based in the UK to try to see how can we create agroforestry projects, for example, that both can benefit local farmers and also potentially are strategically picked medicinal resources that will allow animals to maintain access to the resources that they need. So that's kind of, for me, also the future of conservation is being more thinking about not just let's fill this place with trees, but how can we fill this place with the trees that will maximize benefits for not just ourselves, but also animals.
Absolutely, and I think...
Sorry.
We could talk all day. Sorry. Thank you both. There is that proverb, isn't there? The best time to plant a tree, if it wasn't yesterday, is... Well, if it wasn't 20 years ago, the best time to plant a tree is now. There's a little bit of that mindset with this, you know, like, how do we harvest a better future by creating the conditions for systems to stay healthy, you know, for tending to the earth systems that we need to stay healthy, and hopefully there's richness in the conversation that we've had today. It's been a real honor to host this conversation with you both. Thank you for what you're doing in the world. And I guess LinkedIn is a good way to stay connected, you know, so to keep in touch if this has resonated. Anuradha, myself, Adib, if you're still here, we are part of a session that's being held on Thursday on how can we shift society to be more nature-centered. If some of this is resonating, that we're going to carry on this conversation to say, how do we bring some of this into our businesses, organizations, communities, governments, to bring the principles of living systems into all aspects of life. So do join. And we have a global fellowship of bio-leaders, of people working with nature to change human systems. So that would be my plug. If any of this is resonating, it might be worth having a look at the Bio-Leadership Fellowship. Thanks to all the team. Have a wonderful day. You know, here's to nature.